Welcome to Life Beyond the Founder, a podcast produced by Untold. Welcome back to Life Beyond the Founder podcast. This is episode 3, and in this conversation, Molly and I are going to dive into how do our identities shape the way that we lead our organizations, think about our work, the clients that we're trying to serve. How does that show up in our organizational values, and how do we guard against making organizations in our own image that have a hard time living beyond us? So let us jump into that conversation. Okay, Molly, this is a fun one, but one that we are honestly kind of talking about on the fly. I don't think we've ever used some of the language that we're talking about today, but in preparation for this conversation, I know that we both agree that, whatever your identities are, whether or not they're expressed or articulated, they come out in the way that you live, in the way you act, in the way you behave. And so it's obviously very important to inspect that. And that's part of what this whole podcast is about. How we really inspected our identities and where we place our value and where do we get that affirmation from, and how does that play into our work. And so as I was thinking about this, I do think there are some archetypes of how leaders show up in their role as founders in particular, with a certain approach to leadership that can be really detrimental. And this is not to say that some of these patterns haven't shown up in my own life. I think in some shape and form, we might even have a few of these different patterns that show up from time to time in our leadership. But there's a couple that I want to talk about. I want to get you to expound on them. But the 4 that I want to talk about today is, the first one hits very close to home. It's the imposter. We've all been there. The idea that, any success I have was just by luck. And
it was an accident.
and any failures that I'm experiencing.
That's
really
the real me.
Revelation of who I am. And what that does to a leader when they show up with that kind of insecurity in their identity. The second one, which is often a conversation we have a lot, is the savior mentality. This can be true for anybody in an organization, particularly in the work that we do. But what about, the founder in particular, that I'm here, I can save that, I can fix this, and it's really all on me to help save the day. The third one is the martyr.
This is an insidious one.
This one's really, really tough because it's all in the name of good work. It's a badge of honor to be sold out to the cause, to be devoted to such an extent that you're often burned out, exhausted,
unhealthy.
Expect others to meet you there in that same place as the martyr. And then the last one, which honestly is probably the one that I probably relate to the least, but is the idea of being a prophet. Only I have this vision of what's possible, and no one else can really understand it and get it. So there's really no opportunity for anybody to challenge me on that. They just have to take my word for it, because I've been given a word from on high, and my job is to be the deliverer of that message. So those are 4, and there are more for sure, but those are 4 that come to mind initially. So let's just start from the top and let me get your reactions to them, and how you see them in our own story or in my example, and also as you think about your own journey into the CEO role, which ones are you thinking that I need to be vigilant to not fall into that narrative or that trap? So let's start with the imposter.
So good. Well, okay, I want to jump into the imposter, but even before that, I kind of want to put this preface around how we're talking about identity. Because there's so many things that make us who we are. And there's certain immutable parts of our identities, right? Like our gender and our ethnicity and our race and our nationality and our personality types. And, there's so many things that make us who we are. And those things, to a certain degree, based on who you are, can influence who you believe yourself to be. And so I want to talk about the things about identity that we wrestle with and that actually make us better leaders later in this episode, around okay, my identity as a mom, I actually believe makes me a better leader. But that's more about the kind of immutable, I can't change the fact that I'm a mom. I love it. It's who I am just by virtue of having kids, right? These 4 archetypes, I think, are so critically important when we talk about identity, because these are the things that we believe ourselves to be. They're not unchangeable. They're not necessarily always true. Typically, they're actually not true at all. And they're typically, I think, rooted in a misplaced source of identity. Yeah. And so all 4 of these, like, they look very different. Different versions of them are tolerated differently in culture, particularly in like our little subculture of Christian nonprofit international development work, which is like quite a niche. But like when we talk about identity over these next 4 archetypes, I really want to be clear, like, these are the things that we believe about ourselves that aren't necessarily true. And the good news in that is that we can unwind those beliefs through formation, through relationships, through reflection. There's things about our identity that we can't unwind. I can't change the fact that being a female CEO is different and is perceived differently than being a male CEO. But what we can change is, like, who we believe ourselves to be, the character that we're playing in our CEO role. So
yeah, exactly. And you hear me talk about it all the time. I love James Clear's stuff, and he talks about those small wins, those small things that reinforce what you want, the identity that you want to be true of who you are. And I think that is something that I would love to talk about at the end of this, is how do we, what is a proper view of self in the midst of this founder or CEO role?
Yeah,
and
so good.
How do you do the things that reinforce that identity to yourself, as opposed to reverting back to, oh, I'm really just an imposter.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, tell us about the imposter archetype.
This is honestly, this is the one that I identify with the most. You mentioned that you identify with it too, which is so interesting because we're such different people, and I think it's rooted in different things in us. But the imposter archetype, at some point in their lives, and I've had this conversation with lots of particularly young women, whether they've been on our team or just people that I've met along the way in different roles and different organizations. It's just like, it's a really well-known phrase for a reason. Imposter syndrome is something everyone experiences to different degrees. If you don't experience it, that's like a whole different psychological issue. But the imposter archetype, I think, when we think about the values of an organization and how they're lived out in the culture of an organization, that's all flowing from the founder. I talk a lot with our whole team about the idea that culture trickles down and innovation trickles up. I think usually, and unfortunately, in like an accidental culture, people believe the opposite to be true. Like, oh, the boss has all the good ideas and innovation trickles down and we have to do whatever the CEO thinks is the next best thing because it's their pet project. And it just like does not play on the ground, right? Especially in our work. It's like usually if an idea is originating in the Atlanta office, it is not going to be effective in Kampala, right? And so, if we think that innovation trickles down and culture trickles up, we get in this trap of not realizing how much our personalities can influence the values and the lived experience of an organizational culture for the people that we're leading and working with. So when we talk about these archetypes, I think, yes, it's one thing to talk about, they're not based in truth and we can heal from them and like, don't be an imposter. I think what can be more helpful is actually looking at when one as a leader is living out of an imposter syndrome identity, how is that actually setting the tone for your team? How is that overriding? I don't care what your values are that you've written down as an organization, that you've published on your website. If the leader is living out of one of these 4 archetypes, that will be the value system that is absolutely operating at every level of the culture. And so, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, yeah, absolutely. And this may be where you were going, but the idea of if in your mind, your belief system is that I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
And I can't let anybody figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. It leads to a type of you overcompensate by trying to prove yourself and not show
perfect.
any vulnerabilities, or, try to always be the one with the best ideas, and, all these things that are just, it's not a growth mindset. It's not a learning mindset.
Yeah, it's a protective mindset.
To not let anybody figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. So you lose that curiosity. And all of a sudden, it creates a culture that mirrors that.
Yeah, it's a culture that is inherently on the defense all the time. There's a phrase from our leadership operating system we mentioned in the last episode, the 5 Voices suite of tools, that talks about a healthy leader and a healthy team member and a healthy person. And this is true in relationships and in work, really should have nothing to hide, nothing to lose, and nothing to prove. But if the leader is operating out of an imposter mindset, you have everything to lose, you have everything to prove, and you have everything to hide. Because if you believe, to your point earlier, that everything good is dumb luck and everything bad or every failure is the true reflection of who you are as a leader, then you operate and set a tone of a defensive culture that lacks vulnerability. And at the end of the day, to your point, that will suffocate any type of growth, personal growth, organizational growth, any type of transparency, any type of daylight from actually breaking into a culture and cultivating like growth and beauty and good outcomes. And I think the banner over all of this that I will continue to point back to is that the end result of any of these cultures, as we talk through them, is staff being abused. And there's no faster way to ensure that your clients are going to be abused than if you abuse your staff. And whether you know it or not, like if you're creating a culture where there is no space for vulnerability and everyone is feeling on the defense, that is, at the end of the day, an abusive culture for the team because they're hiding, they're fearful, you can't grow in that. And so there's a really, really scary version of humility that gets twisted into imposter syndrome. And I think depending on immutable parts of your identity, like I think women do tend to have more imposter syndrome. And I think that can unfortunately be praised and encouraged as a version of humility. But that's something I've tried to really aggressively root out. It doesn't mean that I'm like going to be a jerk and like be like, yes, I deserve this. Like, of course. I still like on a literal daily basis battle with like, oh man, like can I hold the weight of this responsibility in a way that the organization deserves and that my family deserves? When that really quickly gets into imposter syndrome and gets into the culture, that's when you just got to root it out. Imposter syndrome is not the same thing as humility. And if we praise it among our team members or among other leaders, then we're actually creating really scary environments for our teams.
Yeah. Wow. That's really, really good. And definitely something that we have to keep guarding against. And it's why it's hard for succession.
Yeah.
It's once again, it's another real big barrier for a leader to talk about succession.
Oh my God,
because the idea that I would even open that door to say, could someone else do this better than I could?
Yeah.
Is the antithesis of, of what we're trying to prove as somebody who's feeling like a fraud and needing to prove that. So maybe let's jump into number 2, the savior mentality.
Oh yeah.
Talk about that a little. What comes to mind when you think about that?
Man, each of these has like a version of itself that's highly praised.
Yeah.
Like,
so true.
I think this one is probably, this one's hard. And, as I talk about these, I want to be like really honest and say that I've cycled through every single one of them. Like, I am not above reproach. I don't think that anyone in our industry has had any length of career in international development where there hasn't been a gravitational pull into a version of the savior complex. And there's so many angles to it, but I think the worst version of it is when you, as the kind of savior archetype, whether it's founder or leader or even team member, I've even seen organizations take on this persona intentionally.
Yeah.
Like we are like the whole, it was like really cool for a while on the application page of nonprofit websites to have a phrase like, quit your day job and save the world with us. Yeah, and it's like that was the thing for a long time. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to save the world. Like my whole goal in life is like, I want to be a do-gooder and I want to save the world. And again, the heart behind so much of this is why it gets so scary, is it's good. Like wanting to do good in the world is a good thing.
Yeah.
What happens, I have seen and personally experienced, when you live into and believe about yourself this savior narrative, not only does it steamroll everyone around you and erode the dignity of the clients that you're serving, because frankly, they're the savior. They're not the saviors, they're the heroes of their own lives. Like, we are equipping people to do the hard work. We are not doing it for them. There's not a single client in our 50,000 graduates who we have achieved viral suppression for. Like we are providing the tools, we're providing the space, we're creating the environment that we hope can maximize their ability to flourish, but they are creating their own flourishing. And it's so cool to watch. And when you take on that savior identity, not only are you eroding the dignity, personhood, and agency of your clients, but you're also creating like a prison for yourself and for your team, because innate in the belief that you're saving the world is that if you don't do it, no one will. Yeah. And the world will not be saved. And people will die. And it will be horrible. And the crushing weight, like the other side of the coin of like, quit your day job and save the world with us, is like, if you don't, no one will. And so at the end of the day, you are the last line between absolute disaster and all of the good things. And that's when people sacrifice their families, they sacrifice their health, they sacrifice their identity, they become incredibly unhealthy, and they take shortcuts to achieve the goals of the organization. Because if you believe that you are the only one capable, or your organization is the only one capable of helping people get out of poverty or get healthy or be exposed to the faith, then you will do whatever it takes to achieve those ends. And it's like, this is the fastest archetype that does this whole, like, the ends justify the means. Yeah. And we know historically that's a dangerous game.
Yeah, we do.
And so we build ourselves this prison when we take on the savior archetype. And again, it's unhealthy for staff, it's unhealthy for yourself. Yeah. And I think the biggest casualty in all of that is actually the leader themselves, unfortunately.
And one of the ways that I think, I mean, you've painted this picture, I think very accurately of what it looks like. I think there, at a macro level, if you actually start to drill down into what does it look like in the day-to-day of a team operating, and I think we're both guilty of this, is like you've talked about in earlier episodes how it's like my greatest desire is to be a helper. Yeah. Not that far removed from being like a savior.
Totally.
And it's like, okay, on the team, I now like I want to enter into and do for and solve and it's been one of the things that's been hard for both of us, sometimes, to elevate to the level that we need to be thinking about as a leader, because we actually began to create a lot of dependency on us and a sense of entitlement as we protect people on our team from being able to have to walk through the stuff that they're doing and solve their own problems and really work through that. So there's it applies on many levels.
It does, because exactly like the macro picture of talking about the end client, you're doing the same thing on your team. Like you're eroding the dignity, the agency, the personhood of your team members. Like in the same way that an organization's ultimate goal, and at Untold, we're constantly trying to get better at this. We'll never arrive. It's like an endless, it never ends in a really beautiful way. But like in the same way we try and create the best environment for flourishing for our clients, the same is true for a leader on the team. Like instead of saving your team members, you want to create an environment for flourishing and for growth. And like at the end of the day, when you stunt people's ability to be challenged and to fail forward, your saving of even like swooping in and saving the day on a project erodes personhood and growth and agency.
Yeah. Well, we know from both our lived experiences what it's like to try to be a savior for your kids.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
We could talk about do a whole episode on parenting and how you know when you step in and try to save, and when do you allow our kids to
it's so hard
to experience their own failures. Okay, so there's not that far of a leap from the savior to the martyr.
Ooh, but it's so different. Yeah,
it's different. Yeah, it shows up differently. But what does martyrdom look like in the founder or leader archetype?
This one, man, it's also just a gravitational pull. Every single one of these, yeah, maybe they're not even like archetypes, but they're just like chapters of every leader's journey that we're constantly all flowing through and resisting the temptation to fall into. But I see and have experienced personally the martyr archetype really, really, really consistently. And that's when it's like relatively self-explanatory from a leader's standpoint, where it's like, I have been called to sacrifice everything toward this good end, and exhaustion and busyness are signs of success in this archetype.
Badge of honor.
A badge of honor. Yeah, like margin is a luxury instead of being an absolute necessity. All of these things that actually create health and growth are looked at as like luxuries, or oh, must be nice. They must have 1,000 assistants, right? Like there's a level of DIY and exhaustion that's really unhealthy. And I think when it comes to actually like trickling down into organizational culture and how this type of founder or leader persona can create spoken or unspoken values on a team, is like, these are the people who like chronically underpay their staff. They're the people who chronically overwork their staff and themselves. Like the martyr's not going to ask anyone to do something they're not willing to do. This is where I fall into it, where it's like, well, I worked an 80-hour week, so it's fine that I'm asking you to. Like, this is the job. This is the expectation. And there's a twisting. All of these things are just a twisting of a good thing. But particularly when it comes to like chronically underpaying and undervaluing staff financially, I see and have experienced this, and I'm tempted to do this, where it's like, well, you didn't get into this job to be financially stable, or, well, for every dollar, it's the Judas thing, right? Like, oh, like this money could go to the poor, right? It's like, this has been a thing from the beginning of time, where it's like, we try and insert a scarcity mindset into a work that requires an abundance mindset. And it's a trade-off. The martyr believes inherently that there is a limited amount of flourishing. And if we are helping our clients flourish, that means we and our staff have to suffer. And that's just not true. That's not rooted in the reality of God's economy. But it's a well-intentioned, we want to help our clients so badly, we want to accomplish our mission so badly that we need to suffer and not have the Christmas party, underpay our staff, work all night long, not show up at my kids' play because the mission is greater. And again, it creates unhealthy staff. And at the end of the day, it hurts the clients.
It does. But I want to ask you to go. I might be opening a door here that I'm not sure we want to walk down, because you might need an hour to talk about this. But there is feels like this very fine line. All of these, like you said, there's not that far from a more healthy expression of this, but there is a world in which we recognize that in our pursuit of flourishing for others, it requires there's actually in flourishing for ourselves, there's a sacrificing of ourselves for the flourishing of others, which in turn creates our flourishing. Yeah. So this idea of like sacrifice, as we talked about earlier, as it leads to the greater good. How do you hold that in tension with like
this is
not
so good
using suffering as this weapon to be weaponized in a culture of martyrdom?
Oh man, you've opened up the can of worms. And
I know. I asked for it. I'm curious.
Well, this is another thing, like I mentioned in the last episode, that like I'm unfolding. So I reserve the right to have like a totally different take on this in 2 years. But I think there's so much at play here, because I'm really particular. I try to be really particular in terminology. And I used to articulate, and we've had this conversation a million times, of like, where does suffering fit into a flourishing life? Because we can't expect, or honestly even really desire, a life without stress or a life without hardship. And so much of that is where we, like the crucible, is where we like build character and see what we're made of and like experience growth and stretch. There's a very, very different version. I think conflating discomfort with suffering is the key here. When we talk about like a flourishing life necessitating sacrifice, I think the unhealthy version of that is the martyr who says sacrifice equals suffering. I believe sacrifice equals discomfort. And those are really different things. I don't want my children to suffer. I don't want them to be in pain. I want them to experience what Andy Crouch, who's one of my favorite thinkers, calls a supportive crucible. Like a level of discomfort. Here's a better way to articulate it. I don't think that it is helpful when people are starving. I do think it is helpful when we get the opportunity to fast. And that's the difference here. The martyr is saying like, we have to starve ourselves in order to accomplish the goal. The healthy sacrificial servant leader says, I want to provide safe and contained opportunity for fasting, for discomfort, where at the end of the day, I'm still giving you the meal. Like, we're going to break the fast together. Yeah. The martyr starves until we die. Yeah. The supportive leader who's creating crucibles for growth and sacrifice says, we're going to fast together, and then we're going to break the fast. And that's the difference to me. That's the fine line that we as leaders get to walk in. And the minute that we start starving ourselves and our teams is when we know we've gone to the dark side of what sacrifice can look like.
That's so good. So let's take on this final one, the prophet. This is one that we have already touched on a little bit when, if you're the leader and nobody can see what you see or do what you do, then it really makes it hard for organizations to live beyond. Oh my
gosh. Yeah.
So what does that look like? What do you think of when you think of the prophet?
This one's great. This is one that feels like a cautionary tale to me because I tend more towards the imposter. I've not really had, it's not a gravitational pull for me to be like, I'm a prophet. That's kind of the opposite. Me neither. Kind of the opposite of the imposter syndrome one. But I've been around leaders like this, and like prophets are real, and that's great. But I think what I've seen, and would love to get your input on this as well, is if you believe yourself to be a prophet, in the worst version of this archetype, you can really blind yourself to being thoughtful about the actual impact of your programs. And this is where I'm going to get geeky a little bit. I'm going to delve into the weeds here with like logic models and theories of change because the leaders who I've been adjacent to or journeyed with or just watched from afar who kind of embody this prophet archetype to me are the ones who cannot hear or will not hear when the work that they're leading is not effective. And I think this is kind of related to the like when we believe that innovation trickles down from the top, when it's like, no, innovation comes from the field. I believe that vision, not like the CEO holding the vision, but like what is it that what problem are we solving? That is so rarely coming from on high to one person to then go, especially in international development, to then go and implement onto a people. Vision in the sense of like, what problem are we solving and why do we exist and how do we address it? I believe has to come from your end user, from your clients, from the communities that you're serving. So the pitfall of the prophet archetype, if you believe yourself to be the one who has received, who like saw the problem and has received the solution. When you become so blindly dedicated to the solution that you have concocted or feel that you've received, you're not able to see when it's not working. And at worst, you're not able to see when it's harming people.
Yeah.
And so it's like the prophet is usually the one who like doesn't have a logic model. They don't have a monitoring and evaluation system. They can't articulate what success looks like in their programs. They're not willing to work themselves out of a job programmatically. They're not running listening sessions with their clients. They're implementing something that maybe it works, maybe it really doesn't, but they're unwilling to hear that. Mm. And I find myself seeing this and feeling really convicted by it, and ensuring that I'm trying to build systems and people around me to not let me ever become that. Because a surefire sign of someone who's like living out the prophet archetype is that when things are not working, when they can't fundraise, when their clients are not graduating or sticking through the program, when growth is not happening, they're going to blame everything around them. They're never going to look internally. They're never going to look at the product that they're offering and say, how could we change this to make it effective? They're going to say, well, the donors don't care and the clients don't get it. And this is why these communities haven't developed. Like, there's so much blame shifting that at the unhealthiest version of the prophet archetype that happens, and it makes their hearts hard. And I think that's a really scary one. Just like all of them, at the end of the day, it hurts the clients. And that is the thing that would be the worst thing I could imagine.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that's where, once again, it's like the reason why a lot of these organizations exist is because, for the most part, somebody was willing to say, hey, I see something in the world that is not as it should be.
Which is beautiful.
It's a beautiful thing. And that is channeling a little bit of that prophet voice.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is what, I see something, the rest of the world doesn't see it. They're not recognizing it. I'm a prophet, I'm a voice in the wilderness saying, hey, we need to change this. And when that becomes the normal, like, operating mode of a leader in that seat, like you said, I think it really does blind them to other voices. Wow. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot because we didn't actually talk about this. Like, is there a word, is there an archetype that you believe captures what the right spirit or posture is that somebody in this role as a founder or a leader should hold if they're thinking about how to carry this? I've got an answer too, but I'm going to let you, I'm going to see what you, I haven't.
So this is very on the spot. Our answer is not going to be the same. I'm letting my nerd leak out. The archetype is Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings.
You said you would not talk about Lord of the Rings on this.
I did. Okay. I literally promised. No, I actually really love the archetype, and it's probably because I identify with it. And I do love Aragorn, son of Arathorn, rightful heir to the throne of Gondor, from The Lord of the Rings, if you're familiar.
Learning a lot more.
Than you wanted to.
How weird Molly is.
No, I love that narrative of the reluctant leader.
Yeah.
Because there's a world in which ambition and charisma, that's one type of leadership, and it's effective and it does things in the world, and that's great. It's not my flavor. I'm not attracted to it. I don't identify with it. I identify with and have deeply respected throughout history and in my life and in my experience the leaders who have been reluctant leaders. I think there's a level of humility in that. It's the healthy version of the imposter, is the reluctant leader who says, I will do it. If anyone else is more suited to do it, please let me support them. I want to be there to do the thing that I can best do to serve this mission. And if that is being the leader, I'm here for it. I'm humble. I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to run with it. But I think the acknowledgement of like, listen, if I'm the one, I'm going to take it on. I'm going to take on the mantle. But if I'm not the one, I'm still here for it. I'm still supporting it. I'm still part of the fellowship. So I think my version of a healthy archetype is the reluctant leader.
Okay.
What's yours?
I love that. just to be clear, you've now used Star Wars and Lord of the Rings as two of your analogies.
Pretty cool.
Yes. We need more sports analogies to weave in there.
Yeah, you're gonna have to do that.
Well, I think about this on a couple levels. One is, you talked about it already, but I would even express it even a little different for me, but how I think about my identity as it relates to how God sees me is so important in this role. And I think the primary identity I come back to is son.
So good.
Like that, that is, there's security in that doesn't lead to the insecurities that come out in all these different identities and archetypes that we've talked about. And I hope that like that relationship and understanding how God sees me as somebody who is a co-heir, and that he's invited me to partner with him in co-laboring in the in doing this work. There's security in that, and there's comfort and hopefully a right orientation. But then as a result of that, and this won't come as a surprise to you, you've already talked about it on this podcast, I think the word, I like the reluctantly word a lot, but I think the word would be more steward.
Absolutely.
I love the steward picture and the steward of Gondor.
Oh yeah, well he was not a good guy.
He was not a good guy. Yeah. But he was steward of it. The idea that I have been, we talk about it all the time in every aspect of our work, the owner versus the steward. The idea that I am a steward, which means that when the person who does in fact own it wants to ask for a state of accounts, I'm accountable. I'm also willing to say, hey, it's not mine. When it's asked of me, I need to be able to lay it down.
Hand it over,
And so I think that's the one that probably resonates with me.
So good. So good.
Okay, so on this, wrap us up. We've talked about give us some final thoughts about how these identities and archetypes we've talked about, how those can, people can then begin to make the organization into their own image and the image of not their healthiest image, but also often an unhealthy image of who they are. So wrap us up, give us some closing thoughts about how do we ensure that we build organizations that are not just reflections of ourselves, or at worst our unhealthy selves.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot internally at Untold, because the values conversation and the culture conversation is really where this all leads to. We talked about the archetypes and how that influences the culture, and whatever values are painted on the wall, the real values are the behaviors that are displayed by the leader and the team. And so at Untold, we redid our values. We don't even call them values anymore. We call them cultural commitments. And we've got these 5 behaviors, essentially, that everyone on the team commits to pursuing. Like, again, it is a directional thing, not a destination-oriented thing. And so I think in this long journey of untangling not only the founder or the leader identity from the organizational brand, there's a parallel untangling of the personal values or the personal identity or the behaviors of the leader from the values of the organization. And there's like, even the healthy version of people, it's still not the best and highest thing to create an organization in your own image, even if you're super healthy. And we talk a lot more recently, especially with our whole team, but historically between the two of us, if we ever find it easy for us to live out the values or the cultural commitments of Untold, that's a red flag. Because if I'm looking at our 5 cultural commitments and I'm scoring myself a 10 out of 10, and if the team around me is scoring me 10 out of 10, it's not taking me any effort or stretching me or making me uncomfortable to live out those values, then I've created the organization in my own image. My values are the organization's values. I think it's really healthy to have to work toward some of the organizational values. Not to say that like if your value is like, integrity, and it's like, oh, it's so hard for me to be full of integrity, that's bad. That's not what I'm talking about. Yeah. Like one of our cultural commitments as an example is that we commit organizationally, globally, to live with an abundance mindset. And that takes sincere effort from me. It's more natural to you. That's something that you also have like always lived out as a personal value. It's not that I have had an antithetical value in any way, but it's that I'm learning still many years in, just based on, you know, my culture of origin and, you know, living in the capitalistic society and like wanting to maximize. Living in a spirit of abundance takes effort, and it takes me getting your advice on stuff, and it takes me asking my colleagues to help point out when I'm feeling protective and not abundant. And similarly, with any of them, like there should be something that you're having to work at if your organization is a thing outside of you. And so I think that's some work that I'll always have to do. You'll always have to, you know, African and U.S. leadership teams are always having to ensure that we're not unintentionally or intentionally creating the organization in our own image, but actually creating something that is bigger than the sum of its parts, especially when it comes to the values and the culture. And so to leaders listening, whether you're in the middle of a leadership transition or not, I think a really healthy diagnostic is to say, are there values that I've created or that I've contributed to in my organization that are actually hard for me? That's a good thing. If not, we need to inspect, like, have we intertwined our values and identities too much with the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a critical part of our rebranding process. We refreshed those about the same time, and it was once again, it was another part of this untangling process that we have, and it was so good. I would have probably, to your point, I probably would have said that the earlier iteration of our values and our culture commitments were more aligned to who I was.
Yeah.
And part of that was because there were less people in the room to inform them.
You didn't know, yeah.
But to your point, yes, I mean, one of them that's really, you know, one of our cultural commitments is to create spaces of belonging, and that was something that I have to work at, because most spaces that I'm in are spaces where people that look like me it's easy to belong. But how do I make sure that I'm creating spaces in our team and our organization, and how are we creating spaces of belonging for our clients in Africa? Like, that's just something that, to your point, that's not necessarily something that I felt like, oh, I got this. I don't need to work on this. So that is a really, really good exercise for organizations who are, maybe it's just time to refresh them. The process of going through it is, and asking yourself, you know, what do we want to be as an organization? Not just because the leader looks this way and acts this way, but because we as an organization aspire to be this. It's a really, really helpful process. So we are going to close this episode out here, and we'll get more into some of the more practical stuff of succession in the next episode. But I will just remind us that from this episode, as Molly said so clearly, is that we need to as leaders be doing the hard work of looking at how are we bringing some of these different beliefs into how we lead, and if we can go ahead and do the work of having a rightly placed identity, that's going to save us a lot of headache when it comes to actually having a succession plan. So thanks.